listening to Unfiltered with Muhammad Uncut, a podcast about personal growth and authentic leadership. If you're looking for tips on how to manage others, get ahead, and make your way up the corporate ladder, this is not the show for you. This podcast is about being of service to others, leading from the heart, and evolving into a better version of yourself. Each episode brings you motivated stories about unfiltered leadership and authentic leaders, those who involve others, use their influence to amplify diverse perspectives, and inspire teams to achieve collective results. If this sounds like you, keep listening. Hello and welcome to the Unfiltered podcast, and welcome to my guest, Dalia Fahmy.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being my guest this afternoon. Dalia, I'm gonna give an introduction about who you are, and I'm sure the background image behind you, this is not a Zoom-generated image. This is testament to what you bring to the world and what you're gonna share with us, your expertise, your passions, your experiences, and what you're giving back to the world. And I want to let my listeners know that there's a person behind the disciplines that you've managed to gather and display and share with us. But who is Dalia? Dalia Fahmy is, and this isn't going to do you justice. I had to condense what I learned about you, but certainly there's so much that we're going to learn, and hopefully can give us an introduction and a view into who you are as a wonderful human being. So Dalia Fahmy is Associate Professor of Political Science at Long Island University. She's also visiting scholar at the Center for Study of Genocide and Human Rights and UNESCO Chair of Rutgers University. She's an author on various areas, including Islamophobia, U.S. foreign policy, and American identity. In 2016, Dr. Fahmy was chosen by New York City Mayor Bill De Blasio to moderate a conversation between him and London's Mayor Sadiq Khan on building inclusive communities the morning after the Chelsea terror attack. Prior to her career in academia, Dr. Fahmy worked at the United Nations covering nuclear disarmament. She has been interviewed by and written editorials in various media outlets, including ABC, CBS, CBC, CNBC, CNN, MSNBC, NPR, PBS, the Huffington Post, the Immanent Frame, the Washington Post, and appears also on Aljazeera. And who dare I say, she's my unfiltered guest today. So thank you very much for giving me some of your time today. I'm actually so humbled to welcome you, but thank you for being on this podcast with us.
You're very kind. It's my privilege to be with you.
Thank you very much, Dalia. And you know, with your incredible background in academia and what you give to the world of education and what you do to remove the masks from bringing us together as human beings and helping us understand how we can connect and have those true authentic connections, because at the end of the day, as I've always said, we may come from many different backgrounds, but we form one nation, and that is humankind. And you've relentlessly and with so much resilience worked hard to educate people, to help them understand that, hey, at the end of the day, we belong to one human race. Mm. Tell me in your own words, where do you draw on this passion to want to make such a difference in the world?
You know, it's, I wish I could tell you the formula, but I'm blessed to come from a family who, my parents immigrated to the United States in the 1960s, right at the height of the civil rights movement, when the immigration laws were changed, and they came to this country as professionals. And they hit the ground, yes, with their degrees, and went right into their professional careers. But as new immigrants to this country, what they also did from the outset was start to build community, and became very, not just well informed about what was happening around them, but by the time we came as their children, a decade later, we came into an expectation that to be part of our family was to be part of the larger community and also to give back. And so while, you know, I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey here, we were, you know, staples at the library and, you know, local community, and everyone knew who we were. And it was just how we were raised. My parents were also very active outside of their professional career in you know, religious organizations, but also community-based organizations. And I think there was just the normal expectation that this is what people do with their lives, right? And it's very, most people see this stuff and see degrees, and they think that's who we are. But I think when you come from a background of a life in service, this is like window dressing, right? It's about what does it mean to be who you are and to be in the world, and to not just connect with individuals, but that what we do in our careers is really about the bigger service of what we're doing with our lives. And so I think having been blessed to come into a family that set that groundwork for all of us children, and all of us are professionals today, it's, our professions don't define us. It's what we do for the community that my parents define us by. So my mom would say, here's my daughter, she's a professor. Here's my daughter, and this is what she does. And her definitions about doing are absent the career. And so I have to credit my parents for putting in us the definition of citizenship as the primary definition of being in the world, for both religious, but also for identity purposes.
Well, they're hand in hand, because I mean, yes, you're a Muslim, and yes, you're a visible minority, and you speak on Islam and Islamophobia. You're a person who's well connected to community and the larger community. Is there a personal story besides what your parents installed in you that kind of threw you in that to help you reclaim that identity and say, you know what, I'm going to make this my life passion? Because you're right, many times we move from role to role or career to career, and we think that it's the career that defines us, but you've actually defined who you are independent of a job. You have brought this to the forefront, talking about it from your heart, and it is who you are. You put yourself out there. But is there something that kind of awoke in you to say, Dalia, this is your calling?
So I'll tell you, I started university just like every good brown kid, right? I was a biochemistry major, and I was going to become a physician, right? Just like every child of immigrants has to do. And I took an international relations course as an elective, like Introduction to International Relations. And it was a course where, I'm sitting in the class and I don't know, should I be writing every word he's saying or just taking it in? It was a way of thinking about the world tied to theory, but the theories were so contradictory. And I was thinking for the first time critically, do I have a voice in this conversation? And so, again, I'm young, I'm undergrad, I'm 18, 19 years old. And I go to my professor's office and I said to him, I'm very curious about what you're saying, to the point where I know I have something to say. So he said, so say it. And so I said, okay. He said, come back tomorrow with 2 pages. I want you to tell me what you have to say. And this was, early 1990s. So this is a long time ago. And at that time, Samuel Huntington the late Samuel Huntington had written that really famous foreign affairs article, Clash of Civilizations ? Of course, we know today the book version, which removes the question mark, and then the foreign policy version that puts an exclamation mark. But this is the first rendition in the article, and I'm reading it, and there is something wrong. This is not the New World Order. I know we had just come out of the Cold War, Soviet Union has fallen, the Berlin Wall has fallen, the first Gulf War was a success, Tiananmen Square had happened, we're moving into an era of democracy, and I felt this language of pulling the world back into this civilizational clash. So I went back to my professor's office and I said, just as I'm telling you, this is not the direction of the New World Order, and I told him why, and he said, you know what, I really suggest you take this field seriously. And I hadn't thought of it like that, because I was a biochemistry major. And so I did. Within a semester, I had switched majors. I still stayed pre-med because, as immigrants, our children of immigrants, we need a big career to fall back on, and medicine is your kind of backup. But I entered into this with the passion that I know I have something to say. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew what I was hearing and what I was studying over the years, that there's something to it. And there's something more to the conversation that I think I could add. And I was blessed to be in an undergrad and then different graduate programs who always gave me the space to not just have my voice heard, but to have built the kind of street cred of my voice matters because I've done all of this work in the past. And so I think this, it wasn't, I can't say one spark, but it was, no, I actually have something to say. And knowing that I come from a background where my voice matters, and that I wasn't going to discredit this feeling of there's a certain level of absence in the field. And so that kind of opens the door to graduate studies and what is a dissertation and what is a book, and why people want to know. It's that you reflect on, sometimes we are told that our voices don't matter, or the silencing of them we do to ourselves. But here, this most famous article was written, and as a 19-year-old, something wasn't sitting well with me, and my professor had the foresight to say, go home, think about it, come back, and then let's see what we can do with your ideas. And he, pushed me to publish in that direction.
Now, I always think that there has to be a catalyst. There has to be a why. There has to be a reason why we awaken we become more aware to saying, this is what I'm meant to do. Sometimes it takes us years. Sometimes it's a work in progress, and we don't articulate it as such. Other times we feel like it's a tug of war, right? Where we're pulling on, I think this, I feel that, and I'm told this, and I'm being told that. Let's not kid ourselves. You came from a family that valued education and empowerment. You came from a family that allowed you to have a voice. And earlier I said, reclaimed your identity, reclaimed your voice. That's very important to me because, our identities as immigrants, our identities here, I'll bring up my Muslimness, my otherness as a Muslim. I don't look Muslim as you do, but the name Muhammad kind of gives me away, but I shied away from it. I hid in the closet for many years and became somebody else until I felt I had to reclaim who I was. And when I say you reclaimed it, because from what I learned about you, from what I listened to you talk, and even right now, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a certain level, even though your professor enabled you and empowered you to speak up, and you had that strong voice, I think it's been a fight and has continued to be a fight to today. Am I wrong?
Let's not kid ourselves. Look, I consistently tell people there's a big difference between being a woman and a minority woman and a visibly Muslim woman, like teaching in the health sciences or teaching the Arabic language. But when you're teaching foreign policy, you're in a hyper alpha male white man's world. And this is the world I grew up in. This is the world I studied. These were my classmates. These were my professors. I never let that stop me. I was always, and often, I'm the only woman in the room, the only brown person in the room, the only person of color, minority, all of the kind of intersections. I'm often the only person in, and I had to learn from other women in different fields that sometimes the that elongated pause is very important. And so, for example, even until today, if I walk into a conference, I will wait a second when they introduce me for people to hear my name and then wonder who it is before I stand up and speak. Because often we are those that are the kind of rendered unspoken or silent. And I have to give people a few seconds to mentally let their eyes and their brains catch up to what I look like. And so it's not easy to be the only. Look, I've been through a lot. However, it never stopped me. And I never let what I look like pigeonhole me. I refuse to be defined as the Muslim professor. I'm not. I'm a professor of political science. I am not a female. No, I am a professor of political science. And I never let anyone, myself included, pigeonhole me into a definition that others me. And so I think that kind of self-confidence that I have always had, but that was instilled in me as a child of you are who you are, not what people say you are. And so even in terms of, my more recent research on Islamophobia, Islamophobia is, and again, I'm not too comfortable with that term. I think it's anti-Muslim sentiment and leading today to, unfortunately, anti-Muslim violence, but it's usually defined as the hysteria around Islam and Muslims. And I think that that's incomplete. It's the hysteria around Islam and Muslims that leads to their marginalization from civic and political life, so that we feel that we don't belong. And so we actually are not politically and socially engaged, right? That this is actually not my country, that I don't belong. And so it's the internalization of Islamophobia that I think is the most violent, right? It's not the perception, of course, the public perception, all of that exists. But the most violent to me is the internalized Islamophobia. And before that language existed, I refused to internalize any kind of definition for myself other than what I wanted, and or other than how I define myself. And I would never define myself against a stereotype or against a perception. And so the limiting, and I unfortunately see it a lot in many minority communities, or in the university that I'm at, it's women of color, LGBTQ women, and men, and anyone who feels a little bit uncomfortable in society as a whole will come to me for advice. Yeah. And I always say, it's interesting that, people look for a voice that is confident in spite of everything we've accomplished. And I always say, you cannot let the world define you, and you can't define yourself against what the world says you are. And so I came through a I can't say difficult, because the nature of the field is difficult. It's a very male-dominated alpha male field, but I came up in a field where I was consistently not fighting physically or even vocally, but fighting against the perception of who belongs to the field. And I always carried myself from day one that not just do I belong, but I have a place to help redefine the field. And I think it's that kind of public perception and confidence that would never allow someone to define me as the minority professor or the female professor or the Muslim professor or the No, I am the professor of international relations at our university, period. You want to learn foreign policy? You're coming to me,
right?
Whether you like it or not. And so it's that kind of pushback on the pigeonholing that I think that I've had to do throughout my life and career, that wasn't a reclaiming, but because I always think I had it, but it was the consistent pushback against, I'm not going to fit your narrative, and I'm not going to find myself against what you want me to be.
And it's almost a form of passive racism, that when we react to this narratives that are pushed against us, we make, if there is a war, and I do believe that there's a war in the media, and there's a war where we have picked up a pen and pushed back through education, and there's also a pen that has pushed back against us through stereotypes. And, we've created the us versus them. But the us here is not just a courageous, outspoken, female, woman, educated, intelligent, Muslim, visible minority professor. It is an advocate for anyone who feels othered. You've become an advocate for anyone who has fit in the narrative where, as a Black woman, as a Black man, it's this internalization of what you tell me that I allow myself to respond or react to. And I just made your job easier because I put myself in this hole. I have put myself in the stereotype. I've worn this stereotype that you are trying to push upon me. And I think you've courageously stood up and said, I refuse to do that. And not just for Muslim women, but for anyone who's been othered. And I think this is an important time to be having this discussion, because we've seen an amplification of the Black Lives Movement. We've seen an awakening of being more respectful to each other because of what's happening with COVID. COVID isn't just a virus because we've done so much injustice to the earth. We've unleashed this virus and we're reacting to it. COVID has, we've awoken to these viruses and now responding to them, virus of racism and bigotry. And I mean, the Me Too movement was just seeing it, we saw the Me Too movement speak up a few years ago, right? We don't want that to go away. All these movements are coming together, but we need the courageous advocates like yourself to say, yes, I am a woman. I am a Muslim. I get it. But you know what? I am also the person who is responsible for being a spokesperson on this particular issue. I am the professor at this university. And the fact that I'm all these other things are not besides the fact, but they're irrelevant to the role that I play in educating others. And I think that's courage. I call that courageous because I look to what you do and I have to wonder, sometimes I get tired of what feels like pushing back or fighting back. Do you tire from constantly, like when I watch you speak, when I turn a YouTube video and I hear you, this voice emanates from within you, but do you ever tire of speaking out?
I honestly, I see everything as an opportunity. I'll give you an example. This is also on YouTube, and I apologize, the sun is coming down. I was giving a really big talk at a major think tank on Park Avenue, New York City. And it was about radicalization and foreign policy and the rise of terrorist groups. And I'm the only visibly Muslim speaker. There were 3 academics, and the moderator is a really famous journalist. And so his final question, he says, to all of us, he's like, do any of you have children? And no one on the panel had children except me. And he says, do you worry? And I said, he says, do you worry that they'll go on the internet and become radicalized? And so I took a deep breath, because what did he do without realizing it is he fundamentally othered me in front of this big Park Avenue, New York City audience at this major think tank where there's 3 academics who are white and myself, and I became the person whose children could one day be the threat.
A relevant question to your counterparts, but
it was to me,
right?
Yeah. And so I had to, in that moment, decide what to do. Now, we had just been speaking for an hour and a half, and I had been putting the groundwork for understanding the international, the domestic, the economic, all of the groundwork of war-prone areas that lead for terror to rise, right? And no one's buying it. You can tell the audience is like, no, they want to hear there's something inherently wrong with Islam, right? And then I get this question out of nowhere, which is, I also don't do well with personal questions. And so I said, you know what, let me tell you a story. And I'll share with you the brief version of the story. This was right after the election of President Trump. And this was during the height of here in the state I live in, of anti-Muslim violence, anti-Semitic violence. And, we had swastikas on synagogues in our neighborhood. We had, I don't know if you remember, black dolls were lynched in university. So this was within a few months post-election. This was a very difficult time. And so this is the context. And so I said, let me tell you a story. I said, in the summer, the food bank in our local neighborhood, or the neighborhood next door, the town next door, it runs out of food after about week 2 or 3. And so I volunteer our family to restore the food in the food bank for the rest of that month, 1 month in the year. And so it's a wonderful exercise for the kids. We go to the grocery store. What are the staples of the food bank? Powdered milk, canned fruit, tuna, and peanut butter, and macaroni and cheese. These are the 5 things the food bank needs. So it's the summer. I have 2 children. We have 4 carts at the grocery store. We're, embarrassing, filling all of the tuna, all of the pasta. This is all in their carts.
Pre-COVID.
This is pre-COVID. But you can imagine 4 carts of like 5 products, what that looks like. And people are like, what are you guys doing? And so we'll tell them we're taking food to the food bank, and people are excited. And here's another $1, go buy another box of pasta. It's a wonderful exercise for my kids to see what civic engagement looks like and what it makes you feel. And so I have a very large SUV, and I have 4 carts. And because I can't, backload everything in, I have to do it from the space next to me because it would be too much into the parking lot. And we're very excited putting everything in the truck. And then a pickup truck comes. And the man begins to hurl some of the worst profanity at me about, people that look like me, what we've done to his country, using some really foul language.
In front of your kids.
And won't stop. And he keeps revving his engine. And he wants to get into the parking spot that the carts are in. This is a 600 space parking lot. And so I tell the kids, don't look at him. Just don't pay attention. Do what you're doing. We're not going to entertain. He wants attention. And so we keep doing it. And so his frustration lends him to back his pickup truck into the spot where he hits the carts. He hits the car doors that are open. My son had to jump out of the way so he doesn't get hit. And he pins me against my SUV with his car. And he gets out and he's in my face saying some of the most horrible language I've ever heard, again, about me and my people and him and his people and his country. And I actually thought he was going to like punch me, but he didn't. He went into the grocery store, and people are in such shock. No one's doing anything. I'm in shock. And even when I call the police, I don't know what to say, because it was my first time. I'm not young. I'm in my 40s. It was my first time being othered to the point of violence. It was the first time I actually heard the words that I don't belong, that this is not my country. And he was talking about him and his country and me and my people. And I'm hearing these words naively for the first time. And it's cutting me deeply, aside from the violence of hitting my car, almost hitting my son. And I don't know I'm on the phone with the police and I don't know what to say. I'm like, this man, he hit. And then, he comes out of the store, gets back in his truck, and just speeds away with the same language. And I'm still on the phone with the police, and they're telling me, they see him on the road and they're going to catch him. And up until that moment, it was about what I'm experiencing as someone in my 40s. And then it hit me that my children are watching. And I remember looking at them and needing them to believe that this is not how it is, that this is not America. I needed to tell them something to believe in their core that this is not America. Now let's go back to my audience. So I said, so the question to me was, what do you say to your kids? And I said, the same way I'm telling all of you that what we had just been talking about is not Islam, what I had to tell my kids is that is not America. And the same way I need you to believe, you are all willing, my children, to believe that that is not America. And so it was an opportunity to completely change the question and to completely turn the tables, that I'm not going to talk about radicalization of my children, and let the audience feel that of everyone in the room, my children could one day be a threat, when in New York City on 9/11, this was my city. This was my town. My brother worked in the towers. My cousin was a victim of the first terrorist attack by Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in Baghdad, when they bombed the UN headquarters, because she was stationed from New York in Baghdad and was one of the first victims of terror in Iraq. And so when you flip the narrative, and it shouldn't be that I have to use that currency, that my brother was in the World Trade Center complex on 9/11, or that my cousin was one of the first victims of terror and Al-Qaeda at the United Nations in Baghdad. But when you flip the narrative of, no, the biggest victims at that moment and until today are Muslims who stand up and say no to those narratives. But in this particular instance, that I'm not going to be othered, and I'm not going to let you other my children. But more importantly, I'm going to flip the narrative of the same way you refuse to hear what I'm saying is the same way you want to will my children to believe that what's happening today is not really America. And so I see all of these moments as opportunities to change the dialogue. Now, we had just had an hour-and-a-half academic conference. The entire audience was coming up to me afterwards to talk about the story.
Right.
And it's very difficult for me to share personal stories. It's not in my personality, and it's definitely outside of my career kind of goals and aspirations. But sometimes those opportunities become some of the most critical turning points of narrative. And so I don't think I get tired. I think I see everything as an opportunity. But it's not just in what we do. It's in who we are. In a couple of years ago, I started running formally. You know, I used to just run to work out, but now I run races.
And you've been in a few marathons, if I'm not mistaken, just recently, right?
Yeah.
26 miles, I think you recently ran.
26.2 miles. Yeah.
Okay.
So I've run, you know, dozens and dozens of half marathons. I've run four the major marathons, and it's kind of like recycling. It's one of those moments where nothing matters except your pace, your nutrition, and, you know, your running group. And it's one of those kind of democratizing moments. And all of us have them, right? If you play soccer, on the soccer field, you're a soccer player, right? If you're a vegetarian, you're a vegetarian. And so I don't allow the perception of being Muslim to define me. When I'm at the food line, my diet defines who I am. When I'm running, my running defines who I am. I don't carry this mantle of burden of being Muslim in everything that I do. On the contrary, it's not who I am. I am who I am, and I lead, I hope, a life with the principles of my faith. And so I'm not my faith, but I hope I lead a life that's based on the principles of my faith. And I refuse to let anyone pigeonhole me as a representative even of the faith. I am not. That is way too much of a responsibility. I think we need to stop doing that. We need to stop doing that to visibly Muslim women. Hopefully we are simply, just like everyone else, inspired by the principles of our faith and not carrying it on our heads.
We don't ask that of others, and yet it's almost assumed that we are going to be the ambassadors of our faith. And I don't have to be. You know, people have said it to me often, oh, you represent. I said, no, it's me. And if I've behaved, hopefully, in a way that aligns with the principles of my faith, thank God, because I don't want to do contrary to that. And as a human being, I've done many things that are contrary, right? But it doesn't speak on behalf of my faith or the 1.1 billion people who aspire to call themselves Muslim. And as much or as little as it speaks to me as representative of the entire human race. I hope that when you see me emanate goodness, you can say that a Jew has done that, a Christian has done that, a Buddhist has done that, somebody who doesn't believe in a greater force has done that, because goodness is not restricted to our political or our spiritual beliefs, right? And it's unfortunate when we hijack those beliefs, or to your earlier point, when we are restricted to belonging and only being representative to those beliefs. We are so much more than that. When we can be seen as everything that we offer for who we are, for the professor at various universities. You know, I could have read your bio, and if you noticed, I referred to you as being a specialist on Middle Eastern and Islamic, but I didn't call you a Muslim. You didn't have to be. And there are many such specialists and experts on Islam that aren't Muslims. And that's good. That's okay. So you don't have to be the person who's carrying this banner all the time and saying, here I am, right? You're not the Statue of Liberty for Muslims, and right? But you talk about leadership, and I love what you say about leadership and what you shared previously, that, because we talked about authentic leadership. Do we role model? Do we role play? And you've mentioned that, how can we be, is it about being the leader that we wish we had versus the leader that we think we are, or the leader that we think we need? And right, so can you kind of help me? Because, this podcast at the end of the day is about unfiltered leadership. And for me, leadership is not about being the professor at university or the person in the corner office, or it's about being a good person. And when you can lead yourself and have those values that govern how you get things done, people will look to you and say, I respect that person for who she is, right? To me, that's leadership. And if it allows you to be a good person in your interactions with others at work, in your community, at school, hey, then you're being a good leader. But can you explain to me, and I'd love to know the personal story behind it, because for you to be able to say, is it the leader that I thought I was, or the leader that I needed, or the leader that, right? Can you take me there?
So, I always say I'm blessed to have had good examples in life, but I honestly believe that all of us are blessed to have passed by good examples in life. The difference is, do we stop to learn from them? And so I really believe that everyone actually experiences some of the most valuable lessons, but it's up to us to kind of heed them or not. And so I believe the most valuable thing we have is time. It's the most valuable thing we have. And so if you think about, the amount of minutes in a day, 1,440 minutes in a day, but we're not working in those 1,440 minutes. And on average, if we look at the 8-hour workday, we're working 480 minutes. And what does it mean to be working for that short period? It means you're respecting that time. And so if you think about some of the leaders that are the ones that I've interacted with, how do they respect time? So for example, President Obama, president of the United States, leader of the free world, shows up to every meeting 15 minutes early. What does that mean? That means you value not just your time, but others in a way that demands that they can't ever say, I was too busy to show up on time. If the president can show up 15 minutes early, it actually became an annoying thing that he would do because others were like, wait, but I'm really busy. But how busy can you be if the president is there 15 minutes early? When I worked at the United Nations between a master's degree and my PhD, and I worked on nuclear disarmament. This is like during Y2K, that time period. And
I'll fast we forget.
And the world was falling apart and collapsing. Yes. Little did we know 2020 was coming. And it was during the Clinton administration. And I was working on nuclear disarmament. And during the GA period is when all the heads of state descend on New York. And after the world leader gives their address, you actually have the opportunity to go and line up to meet them. And so I remember I only lined up ever in all my time working there to meet President Clinton. And so I line up, and it's the longest line I've ever seen. But he had this ability that when he shakes your hand, there's 100 people behind you and 100 people he's already shaken their hand. That in that millisecond, he looks you in the eye and makes you feel like you're the only person in the room and makes a personal connection. And so when you think about leaders, what does that signify? That time is valuable, but more so the person in front of me is valuable. And so how does that reflect in what we do with our own time and how we treat others' time? I think for myself, the most valuable thing I do for myself is respect my own time. And so if I know that there's 24 hours in a day and I'll be sleeping 6 to 8 and I have responsibilities to all the buckets of my life and the rest, and you're extremely organized, not only do you get things done, but you respect your own time as well as the time of others. And it's something that I really learned by watching very successful leaders in my life, people who are successful in their career, but when you also see what they do in their extracurricular activities, they're like triathletes as well, and also very well read. And so what does that mean about how you value your time? But also, how do you value others' time? And so I believe that one of the most critical things leaders teach us is how to be self-disciplined and how to inspire others to want to have that same kind of self-discipline. I've never seen a successful professor, CEO, athlete that wasn't also implementing those elements of success in the rest of their life, right? So if you're disciplined at work, you're probably disciplined in your diet, and disciplined in your workouts, and disciplined in spending time, quality time with your family off of your cell phone. And so it's that kind of respect for your own time and the time of others that I really think makes someone a leader in their home, as well as a leader in the community and a leader in their career. But more so, there's always the leader we think we want, right? So we want someone that takes us under their wing and kind of makes us feel secure about ourselves. But again, I grew up in a world where that wasn't the paradigm, right? You actually had to cut your teeth really in a really difficult way to then find the success at the end of the horizon. So I'll tell you a story. When I was in grad school, I was taking a seminar in causes of war with one of the most famous professors in war theory. He's one of the only ones who says he made a law in political science. So it's that one, if people know who I'm talking about. And we were a seminar of 3 students. So imagine how difficult it is to be in a 3.5-hour seminar when there's 3 students. Now, this is not a lecture, this is a seminar. So when he asks me a question, there's going to be about 15 follow-up questions. And the follow-ups are more difficult, and they're getting more difficult. And there was times where the story in my head was, he doesn't like me. Why is he so hard on me? I'm trying so hard not to cry. Like, this is what's happening inside of me. And I'm fighting those emotions, right? And I must have gone through 75% of the semester convincing myself he has it out for me, he hates me, he's picking on me. And because he wasn't doing this to the other 2 students in the room. And so again, I mean, this is a different subject, but the stories we tell ourselves, right? And so this is coming near the end of the semester. I was actually out in a hall outside of another professor's office waiting to speak to that professor. And then this professor turns the corner and I see him in the hallway, and I'm having a mild heart attack because I'm so scared and intimidated by him. And he says, hi, and he keeps going. And then he comes back and he says, do you know why I'm so hard on you? And so I was like, oh, it's not my imagination. He is hard on me. He says, do you know why I'm so hard on you? Your first paper in my class, I gave you an A+. It was my first time in years giving an A+. And I believe in path dependence, which is if you set the bar here, not only do you have to keep it, but you have to excel beyond it. And so when I push you hard, it's because this is where I want you to fail, in my presence. Because when you go out into the world, I don't want you to fail there. So I'm pushing you so that you have the confidence in what you're saying, so that you actually can carry yourself with confidence when you don't have the luxury of being a graduate student, when you are the expert. Now, I just spent a whole semester hating his guts, right? And thinking he has it out for me. But actually what he was doing was giving me the most important lessons that I didn't know I needed, right? And so that's what I mean between the leader we wish we had, but the leader we actually need.
Powerful.
And so he really was training me, probably, like how some parents throw their kids into this pool, learn how to swim rather than the coddling. So maybe there was an element of that, but today I genuinely appreciate that when I would make a claim, he would make me justify it to the point where sometimes I was like, is what I'm saying not making sense? Is that why he's asking me so many questions? And no, what he was doing is making me confident in my claims and teaching me how to substantiate them and to hold my space as someone who knows what I'm talking about. Now, the lesson learned is he wanted me to be able to fall in his presence so that he can help me get back up. And so it wasn't a personal attack. He was doing his job as training me to be a future political scientist. And the story in my head was that really dangerous, like pathetic, finding sympathy for myself of he has it out for me. but all along, he actually was taking care of me, and I didn't yet appreciate it.
And Dalia, I know you said a different subject, but I think it is the subject, because as we transform and as we strive to be better and stronger and more resilient and more educated and to have that confidence and courage and balance and integrate our vulnerability with this courage, which I think you've done so well. It is the internal chatter that just doesn't shut up. And somebody today said to me, introduce yourself to that voice rather than try to silence it. We don't silence others when we're in conversation. Why? Because I do a lot of these videos on, and I talk about emotional intelligence. It's silence the inner critic. And I've been telling that to my 13-year-old boy. And today it's like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean introduce myself to that inner critic and maybe hear him out? And what I want to say to you, you were fortunate in that he took the time to stop. Otherwise, you may have lingered and wallowed in your self-pity that he hates me. Now, you're a tough cookie. I know you wouldn't have done it for too long. But somebody like me may have just walked away and thought, damn, he hates my guts. So, how can you tell the rest of us if we don't have that recovery moment where somebody lets us know why they're hard on us? If that partner or parent or sibling or friend or manager or boss or leader, that person who is truly concerned for our well-being and our growth is a little hard on us, how can we recognize if they're just being a hole or if they truly have our best interest in mind? How can we figure that out?
So the inner voice is a very powerful voice, right? It can convince you of a reality that doesn't exist. But I don't say ignore it. I think the inner voice is a very powerful voice, but it has to be harnessed. But first, and this is more for, I'm sure you experience this with younger people and millennials, if you think about the most successful singing group in all time, the Beatles, right? We just know them as the successful singing group, right? What we don't know is that before they were successful, they were practicing in underground clubs every single night, whether there was an audience or not. Why? Because they had to perfect their craft so that when they're touring every single day, being put on the spot, you can't be an expert if you haven't cut your teeth even, right? So they do the hard work that nobody sees. One of my running mentors, everyone sees the medals. What no one sees is, the cuts, the bruises, the bad run. The sweat, the pain, all of that, right? It doesn't photograph well, of course, but that's what it takes. It's the training. And training for a marathon is a daily event, right? It's never about the medal. It's about the journey. And what most of us, especially I think, unfortunately, this generation that is really suffering from this thing of the kind of the end result and not the journey, is that they don't understand the value of hard work. And so my running mentor, on long runs on Saturday, I have to run for 3-4 hours, right? Okay. No podcast is going to be this fantastic for this long. And, he said to me, he's been running much longer than I have. He's like, the first 3 miles suck for everybody. Don't kid yourself, right? He's like, for me, Olympian, the first 3 miles suck, right? So once you acknowledge that there's going to be a level of pain before you get to the cruising kind of altitude of running of now my body's conditioned, everything's functioning, everything's oiled, I can run for the next 2-3 hours without thinking about it. It's the beginning that hurts and the beginning that painful. And it's the beginning where the voice is most strong telling you, everyone's having brunch. What are you doing running, right? This is something every Saturday morning I grapple with of why am I up so early running when everyone's having breakfast, right? This makes no sense. And so I think it's that when things are difficult, is that when you listen to your voice? Or is it when things are going well and you're in the cruising altitude, those kind of inner miles that no one sees, what is your inner voice telling you, right? Is it telling you, wow, this is not so bad, right? Look up, look at the trees, right? Wait, there's a goal and you're meeting it. And wait, well done. Why is it that voice that we don't listen to? Sometimes it's the euphoria voice that we're waiting for, like, oh, wow, this is so fantastic. And
The one-off.
And you and I both know that those are usually big letdowns, right? Crossing the finish line is not always the big thing. It's the kind of pride in the journey that you might reflect on later at a later moment. It's never about the moment at the finish line. But it's when are we listening to our inner voices? When things are difficult and it's telling you to give up, or when things are in the cruising altitude and you're able to start reflecting. Most of the writers, fiction, nonfiction, academic, non-academic writers are also runners. Why? Because it's your time to think freely with no interruption. And you can have that conversation with the voice of what's really important, right? And so there's definitely that aspect. But what about the negative kind of mentor who's trying to teach you and you can't see the lesson? Is it because we are no longer valuing the journey? If you're a sprinter, it's really hard to be a marathoner. Why? Because the finish line is right there, right? You can't value the long journey. And so it's where is the hard work? We never see the hard work. You don't see the hours of self-doubt. You don't see the hours of agony. You don't see athletes in therapy, all. But why is it that we no longer value the journey? I actually think the journey is more important than the outcome.
Right.
While that's rewarded, believe me, none of this stuff matters if it doesn't mean anything in the world, right? You know, what does it mean to have a wall full of degrees if it's not leading to a life that makes meaning of the world and helps in some way? And so I think while there are those inner voices, and just as you said, that they have to be engaged, we have to know which version it is that we're engaging, because the loudest one is the one that wants you to quit. But the most important one is the one that's telling you it's about the journey. You know, and again, we're in a time period where it's no longer about the journey, it's about the outcome, right? It's about the output. It's about the thing I can Instagram, the medal that I can show off. And honestly, if you look at, you know, most ultra marathoners who've been doing this for a very long time, they no longer run races for medals. It's all about personal satisfaction, right? And I want to conquer this mountain for myself, right? Or I want to go on this hike because reaching the pinnacle privately without
not because I'm gonna put it here and share it with the world.
Instagramming it is the personal journey that gives me satisfaction, that actually inspires me to work harder in everything I do. And that's why for me, some of the most dynamic leaders are never the ones who define themselves by their career. You know, look at the big firms, right? Their leaders are not ever, they carry themselves by their first name, right? It's Jeff, right? And you speak to Jeff and he wants to talk to you about running. And so I think that for us, breaking what defines a leader, and also what defines success is really critical. I'm sure, I mean, this is the area of expertise, but I'm sure over the years you've seen a dynamic shift in how people really value output in terms of signifiers. I don't mean work output, but the signifiers, the accolades, and not really the value added to the product. And I really think that's reflective in everything we do. And so the inner voice has to be harnessed, has to be in conversation, but it has to be the right one. And in terms of what you get to in the end, if you don't value the journey, then the end is anticlimactic.
Right. Or the end doesn't ever arrive because we're always looking for a better outcome. And, you know, it's what am I going to do next week? Or you achieve what you did today, you get this degree, or you get to meet this person, or you do this. But, you know, there's always the shiny object. It's the next better thing. But what I love, and you kind of, and again, it's because three of the things you mentioned have been topics that have been going around in my head today. And, you know, one of them is, the destination or the journey, because I was blogging about that today. You know, we often just think about where I'm going and forget how I'm getting there. You know, the stories that you can tell, and, you know, no disrespect to what you have behind you or to the people that you've met or the stories that you've earned and the places that you've been, and right, but I'm sure they've been punctuated by struggles. You shared at least 2 of those with us today. Thank you. That's vulnerability, that leads to courage. Because at the end of the day, we are all human. We are all, we all have our inner battles. And the second thing that I heard is that voice, it's not unique. There are voices. And what I love about what you said is choose the right one. I can say to the naysayer, thank you, I heard you. But you know what? I'm choosing now this voice here that is saying, well, I don't know how to do that yet. I can't figure it out yet. And so I'm going to shift to this voice as if I'm in a room with multiple people now, right? You know what? To all these voices, I'm not going to ask you to silence. I'm going to listen to you, but I'm going to choose who I'm going to listen to and who I'm going to enable to help me make decisions. So, I thank you, because I normally just say, well, turn off that inner chatter. But no, I think I need to hear it out and spell it out, right? And we don't get to that destination. And life is a series of journeys towards multiple destinations. And I know you've reached many of those. And I don't want to belittle you or the listener to think that it's been easy, because I know even though you're a very confident, outspoken, articulate, and courageous individual, I'm sure you've had your struggles and your battles, and I think you'll continue to have those. What advice, and this is where, it's because I can talk to you for another hour. I want to, there's something I call the unfiltered thought of the week, where I ask the guest to give a piece of advice or self-learning or experience, something that they've gone through that has allowed them to overcome adversity or to become a stronger individual. So I'll say to you, the Dalia beyond the degrees, beyond the achievements, and I say that with utmost respect, by the way, honestly, I say that humble today by speaking with you, and beyond the individual who's become a standard bearer, even though you refuse to admit that, but you have become the voice for many, and thank you for that. But what advice would you give when we don't think we have the stamina, when we can't run the 0.2 miles extra, when we think we have to give up, when the inner voice becomes the more dominant one, or when the external voices shut us down, or we allow them to push us back into our internal cubicles, and we say, that's it. What would you say to those voices?
For every person that we think is successful, there have been thousands who the inner voice told them they couldn't. And so for me, it's really about thinking about what it is we want to be. I mean, look, success or getting on this journey it's not about the end, right? There are goals. I've always had goals. Even when I was young, my pediatrician, who's still a family friend, would say, you knew what you wanted to do, and you always had goals. And even if you didn't become a physician, because that was my goal as a kid, it was always important that you had a goal, and you were always working towards something and working hard towards it. But I think what gets us to success in whatever it is grit. Because for most people, again, for every success story, it's not the person who's most talented who becomes a CEO. It's not the person who knows the most, who has read. We've all met leaders or successful people, and you're like, I'm 10 times smarter. X could have done this, right? But they had a level of grit, a level of endurance, a level of being able to withstand whatever life threw at them, harness it and move it in a different direction. Life is not easy. Life is not linear, and everyone's life is different. But life is full of tests. We all know that. Personal, in your health, in your career. But are we able to take those tests and with a level of grit, harness them, either to propel us forward or to embrace a new direction? I really believe that the kind of road to success in this world are being able to live a life in purpose, but that purpose is the goal. So whatever life throws at us, we're actually able to harness it and move in different directions and still get there. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, I was still a professor, but would you be on TV and would you be, I said, of course not. I'd be writing books, right? And it might not be 10 degrees of separation. I might not be part of other think tanks, but there is opportunities that come in life that you can choose them, you can bypass them. It's not about success and failure, but it's about, are you able to endure the process to getting there? And unfortunately today, I think some of the biggest challenges, I teach 18 to 24-year-olds, undergrads and master's students. And some of the thing that breaks my heart the most is the inability to deal with change, the inability to deal with uncertainty, and the inability to actually face life with a level of grit, that I can roll with the punches. I can make the best of this moment, that this is an opportunity. And if I could advise young people, it's life is tough. And it doesn't mean it can't be overcome. And every challenge is not a door closing. It's not falling on your knees. Well, life is about falling on your knees so that you can get up, right? Every door that closes, something else will open. And every door that closes is actually not a closed opportunity. It's something that you have to redefine. And you can actually go and open that door again. But it's the impending short goals, can't deal with failure, giving up, that I think is the most detrimental aspect of this coming generation that's so used to, instant success, instant, gratification. Yeah. Real success and real gratification comes way down the road. And for most of us, sometimes it never even arrives, right? Because as you said, the goalpost keeps moving, right? Well, you ran your first marathon. Well, there's 5 majors, right? And after the majors,
the constant upgrade, right? There's always something, right?
But I don't think that that's bad. I think constantly having goals is extremely important. Right. And it as you reach, I hope not middle age, but as you reach middle age, you're starting to think, what keeps the mind going? It's the constant challenge. It's the constant reading. It's the constant learning. The constant
living.
The most successful people I know read every day, value their time, invest in themselves, and invest in everyone around them. And I think these basic life lessons that our parents taught us, that all the books on success keep yelling at us, right? But I have issues with the new books on success that are about, mindset and just that, without the grit and the hard work. It's really about putting in the time and understanding that the journey is never going to be easy, because if it was easy, the destination is not worth it.
You throughout this conversation, you've made me teary-eyed, honestly, and it's because something that has become evident in our talk and wanting to chat with you before, and knowing that there'd be some sort of connection, and I feel that when I speak with people, but there's a reason things are happening always, and as I get older, I've come to accept the reality that things happen for a reason, whether we or not. And I know that sounds cliche, but I recently lost. I was defeated in elections. I tried to run for a member of parliament, like a congressperson, right? And I got second place. It was tough. It was the second most difficult journey or destination in my life. But wow, the learning and the opportunity. I realized that after the fact. A leaf falling and me noticing it is as significant as I want it to be. And you and what you've shared with us today, and what I've heard and what I've listened and what I've felt and reacted to, it reinforces every single person you meet, every encounter. Before I hit record, you and I were talking about an experience that you had when you visited Canada last, and hopefully you'll be able to visit us soon. Met someone and the impact that had on you through that meeting. And, my response to you was, as much as it was an opportunity for that person to benefit from having met you and the impact that you had on her in that moment, I think she also left an imprint on you. And right. And so every single person we meet, if we choose to listen to the tune that is playing in the wind, to the tagreed of the birds. What do you say that in English? The song of the birds, right? If we choose to acknowledge every small and great miracle that is happening around us, we will recognize that it is part of us. It is part of our journey. It is a way to get to the destination. We have to listen to it. And to the point that you made about they become the voices that we could listen to, and we could go beyond the voices that weigh us down to the voices that help us rise. And I want to thank you, not just as the person that you have become as a spokesperson for many, not as the individual who has decided to run the marathon, but for being the person you've become, right, and the impact that you're having on others. And I think that is what it's an incredible journey. And thank you today for allowing me to be part of that journey and for being my unfiltered guest. It was a blessing. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you so much, Dalia. Stay blessed. Peace. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Unfiltered, the show about authentic leadership and personal growth. Like what you heard? Click subscribe, share it, and tell a friend about it. And don't forget to leave a rating.